Hey there, my name is Pravus, and welcome to Stellaris. The new expansion, Overlord, has been released, and I'm really excited about this one. I happen to be a player who already likes to build wide and subjugate all of my neighbors very violently, so this expansion speaks to me on an almost spiritual level, if you know what I mean. A big thank you to Paradox Interactive for sponsoring this video and getting me early access to the expansion so I can record it. Very helpful, obviously, and if you guys would like to learn more about this DLC, you can find a link in the description down below. Now, obviously, a primary focus of this expansion is focusing on the change in relationships between overlords and their vassals, and I do plan on showing that off in today's video. But before I do want to draw attention to the fact that there are going to be 5 new origins available in the game with this DLC, and I'll cover these very briefly. We have the Progenitor hive, which is a new way of playing the hive. Rather than an Overmind that controls absolutely every detail itself, it's evolved to have several semi-independent leaders that coordinate things for it. So think of the Overmind from StarCraft and its Cerebrits, and you basically have an idea. This is actually what we're going to be playing with today, and I'll go into more detail in just a little bit. The subterranean origin starts you off in caves. There are some perks to being in caves, and also some pretty serious downsides, though I think lithoid species are going to find they have a very fun time with this. Slingshot to the Stars starts you off with a ruined megastructure called the Quantum Catapult, which is new, and it has the power to yeet your fleet across the galaxy, though with mixed success as to where it's going to land. Teachers of the Shroud is a new spiritualist origin, which I haven't played with too much, but it gets you interacting with the Shroud Walker Coven, which is a new faction that can help increase your connection to the Shroud. I imagine that'll be pretty fun. And then finally, you have Imperial Fiefdom, which starts you off as one of several vassals of an advanced start AI. This sounds kind of terrible, like no one wants to be a vassal, but it actually comes with some pretty nice perks, and you can build your civilization to have, let's say, outrageous mineral production, or perhaps science production, and then after a few decades, when your advanced start overlord eventually crumbles, you suddenly get thrust into prominence in the galaxy. It's a slow start, but built correctly could become very, very strong. Anyway, as I said, we're going to be going for a Progenitor hive, and for this, I have kind of co-opted a somewhat meta-ish build from the last patch. We do, of course, have a hive mind with Ascetic, because it's very good, and one mind, because I wanted to go for a little bit of extra unity, also less negative traits for leaders. But beyond that, though, I am going for the mix of aquatic and budding. Very, very powerful combo. We have to have an aquatic trait for ocean worlds, and as long as you're a plantoid or a fungoid species, you can go for budding, which gets you a lot of extra pop assembly the more you stack up in one location. Beyond that, intelligent, because science is really good, and then unruly and solitary, though we will be gene modding these out pretty early on. Let's go ahead and start a new game. I will be playing on Captain difficulty and reducing the cost of tech and tradition just so we can make this video a bit faster. Everything else we're going to more or less leave as default. And here we are. Okay, our starting position is kind of in the middle of several different branching paths. That's a little unfortunate, but hopefully gives us a lot of opportunity in the future. I do see we have an ocean and a continental world immediately nearby. That's actually pretty darn handy. Hopefully we'll be able to get some really good early colonies going for us. Beyond that, let's go ahead and pick up some research speed for a lot of different categories. Science is always going to be really, really good. And I do want to go to my ship designer and make sure that we strip off a lot of the equipment on these ships because I need to get some extra alloys. Now, one thing you may have already noticed here, though, is we have something called an Offspring Corvette, all right? So let's get into the topic of Offsprings. Let's talk about that very briefly. I'm going to go to my capital world over here in Miralyn, and we have a special unique structure for our Offspring Progenitor hive. It is called the Offspring Nest. It's basically a straight-out upgrade to the spawning pools you might have had before. You get a pretty good amount of extra organic pop assembly and some amenities, and all menial drones are going to have 10% extra output, which is pretty much all raw resources, so that's not half bad. But one downside of this is whenever we colonize a new world, if we do not have an Offspring Nest, you get a whopping 50% penalty to your menial drones, so you have to have one of these on every world, otherwise you're simply not going to get very much value. Fortunately, it's such a good building, it's worth building all the time anyway, and with budding plus this, we're gonna have some pretty darn decent assembly progress for our pops in addition to our regular growth. I like that a lot. Now, as far as offsprings with ships, you have a similar thing. If you do not have an offspring Corvette, destroyer, cruiser, whatever it's going to be, with this special module right here for an Offspring, you're going to take a massive penalty. Your fleets, by default, have a minus 50% stat value to all 4 of these stats shown here: speed, evasion, fire rate, and accuracy. If you have the Offspring, you get plus 55%, so it kind of offsets that minus 50, and you get a little extra besides. But I can say, if you have built a fleet with these Offspring, and your Offspring get killed in the middle of a battle and you don't have any backups, your fleet is going to get shredded. So it's a bit of a risk reward. Slightly stronger fleets as long as they have coordination, but as soon as that coordination goes away, your fleet is doomed. So keep that all in mind. Now, the first thing I really want to do is explore these worlds and get colonizing, because the faster we can get our population growing, obviously the better, so I will want to get myself some colony ships early on, which as a hive mind are going to take a lot of food and some alloys. So normally I'd sell off the excess food and just go for things like minerals, but in this case, better to go ahead and start stocking up on some of that food. On our capital world, I am looking to probably grab a synaptic node to start getting a lot of extra unity production so we can start making progress down our traditions tree, and then I also want to get a fair number of research labs. When I colonize, I'm going to have one world dedicated probably to research, and another one dedicated mostly to alloys, and between all of those, I'm hoping we can go for a bit of a cruiser rush build. Let's not forget we also want to set ourselves to isolationist. I'm going to go for a proactive first contact protocol. And something I want to draw your attention to here is subjugation war terms. We can start off oppressive, balanced, or benevolent depending on what we want to do. Very interesting, isn't it? I'm going to go to balanced for now. We're not going to take use of this for a little bit, at least until I find a neighbor that I'm able to subjugate. But at some point, this is going to be very important. Now, one benefit of playing as a progenitor hive, all of our leaders are passively going to be gaining experience every single month. So what can happen is you actually find yourself getting some pretty surprisingly decent governors, admirals, generals, and scientists, even if they haven't been doing very much, which means you're going into a war with, let's say, slightly better admirals. That's actually not bad. I'm kind of happy with that. I don't really see crime and deviancy as being that important, so I'd rather go ahead and grab, let's say, an architectural interest governor, and I am going to swap them around in my primary capital over here, and then I'm going to fire the excess guy, because again, who wants to pay an upkeep on these guys if I'm not using them, am I right? You got to be a little bit more careful with your leaders than you used to be. Can't just spam them out anymore. And we already are finishing off our synchronicity. That was actually pretty darn quick. All right, extra edicts fund, and now we have to go for an extension perk. Technological Ascendancy is still one of my personal favorites, so you could go for Executive Vigor for the extra edicts, which is very, very powerful. Now, that said, I've already got a little bit of extra edicts fund, and I've only so far researched the capacity subsidies, so I don't think I need Executive Vigor now, though this could end up being my second pick. I think instead we're going to go ahead and grab Technological Ascendancy and try to start snowballing that research bonus as much as we can. I did find, by the way, 2 more ocean worlds, which is phenomenally lucky, so we've got a total of 5 planets in our home empire currently set up here, including my capital, which could be really good, and only one of them is going to be a non-ocean world. That's great. We met our first neighbors. Okay, probably anyway. I mean, it could be Tithyanki, but I don't think it is. Alright, so here's hoping we meet somebody who is going to leave me alone for a pretty good long while, and we can easily subjugate in the future. Now, one of the weird things about playing as a hive mind and an aquatic is, one, we can't exactly subjugate other races, we can't assimilate them into the hive, at least not yet, and two, if they aren't on ocean worlds, then conquering them for myself doesn't seem all that advantageous. So, subjugating and turning people into vassals as a aquatic hive mind kind of makes a lot of sense, which is great for this run, because that's what I need to do anyway. And there's our neighbors. Wow, ugly fellows, aren't ya? Ruthless capitalists. Uh-oh. Well, that's gonna be nice. They are different indeed. We've met somebody. That's cool. And they are encroaching on my territory. Good thing I cut them off as much as I could. Finishing up with Discovery pretty quickly. Now we're gonna go ahead and grab that Executive Vigor, get that Edicts Fund nice and high so I can easily pass capacity subsidies. And you know what? For good measure, let's also do the mining subsidies. And we're just slightly under, so now I can get all 3 of these running, which means I'm going to have a much stronger economy for absolutely free. Now, do be aware that as your empire grows, these get more expensive, so you could find yourself in a situation where you went over your edicts fund without knowing it, and you should check back here periodically and decide which ones you might want to turn off. But that's one reason why continually building up your edicts fund isn't a bad idea, so you can keep these going at all times. Oh, we've met our neighbors to the south. I say south as if there is such a thing in space. You know what I mean. Hey, these guys look just like us. Have we found our long-lost cousins who refuse to submit to the consciousness? I don't know. Maybe. That could very well be. You settled in my own territory. You, all right, you know what? That's it. We are closing the borders to you. Frickin' heck, now there's border gore. Look what you're gonna make me do. Now I have to kill you. Let's see, gene modification could be something worth doing. I mean, we're not gonna be able to go for anything synthetic, obviously, with my eventual ascension perks, so might as well focus on those gene points while we can. And then we also have an unspent civic point, which I could use to reform the government if I had a bit more unity. I think what I'm gonna go for is probably subsumed will, which eliminates the unity cost for moving my drones around, and obviously since we have budding, we're gonna have very rapidly growing populations in centralized planets like my capital, to the point where I will have more drones I know what to do with. So this could be helpful there. And our pop size, it's what's going to be contributing the most to our empire sprawl, which is obviously increasing the cost of tech and tradition. So reducing that by a lot is nice, and it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of extra edicts fun. So once I have unity, I think I'll go for this as my third civic. Cruisers are done. Alrighty, so we want to go to our ship designer and make sure that we get something designed here. Now note that we do have access to things like Offspring cruisers as well. You'll have one for every ship type. But that doesn't mean we can build it yet. Take a look up over here and you can see our naval capacity determines what kind of Offspring ships we're able to have. So for example, we can have 3 Offspring corvettes, or we can have 1 Offspring destroyer. Until we increase our naval capacity, I'm not going to be able to get one of those Offspring cruisers itself. That said, we should think ahead of time, like what kind of a design we want for these. Remember, we want to protect our Offspring at all costs. That means keeping them toward the back lines. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to design them to be a variant of carrier. That's the best way to make sure that they are staying away from the front lines, out of harm's way, because if these fall, my entire fleet will probably fall with it. Ooh, we met somebody new. Okay, these are the Shroud Witches, the coven I was talking about. So, these guys can do some weird stuff, like what will be our fate, or would you send us a teacher? I mean, if we do that, let's see, 10,000 lifetimes, should you wish it, we will consider something else. If we're willing to spend a fair bit of influence and money, we would get a new decision, Shroud Walker Teacher. I don't know what this does yet, but I'm really curious. Let's go ahead and do it. Sure, I want a teacher. Teach me. Let's go to decisions over here, and where would you be? There you are. Gets amenities, unity. Ooh, and you'd get even more if you had telepaths, which I don't. But 10% more unity plus some amenities, I mean, that's not bad. Oh, and we have access to a totally new megastructure, the Hyper Relays. So these are something you can build in pretty much any of your systems, and what they do is I think they prevent you from having to travel across the system in order to then get to the next hyperlane. Basically, you arrive in a system and then you can immediately move on to the next one. It's kind of like creating a highway through your empire, which is really great since movement can be a bit annoying, but it's a pretty expensive investment too. Okay, and we have somebody who is attacking me, so that'll be fun. Was kind of expecting to be able to get into my own thing first, but all right, they're attacking me. We can probably win this. Is these guys down to the south, huh? They got inferior fleets. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you ain't gonna win. Yeah, here we go. Notice that I am keeping my Offsprings at a good, safe distance over here, so there's really no risk. We lose 1 cruiser and just knocked out a huge chunk of their fleet. Yeah, that's not too bad. We can handle this as long as we play somewhat defensive at this stage of the game, until I can get more cruisers set up, and then just absolutely rip these guys apart. There we go. Wow. Amazingly, despite the fact that I was doing nothing but losing ground across the board, we somehow won the war, because I got their war exhaustion nice and high. And, to boot, I have a much stronger fleet now, so unfortunately, I think this does mean that I have to now wait for the truce timer to be up, but once it is, we should be able to absolutely obliterate these pathetic fools. I'm just sad that they attacked me first, because now I'm stuck waiting for a while. Boo! Anyone else I can go kill? We can head all the way down here to the Pliff Plaff Empire. Yeah, we could do that. Here's a fun fact. So it used to be that you could not declare a subjugation war until first you demanded that they were vassalized, and then they would reject it. Then you would be able to declare war. But apparently in the newest expansion, what actually can happen is if you're just much stronger than them, straight out, you get the subjugation casus belli. So we can do that. This guy appears to have some defenders, which will be fun. Plus, they have a tiny little protectorate. But they're pathetic, which means I'm pretty sure that I can just subjugate these guys and go directly to war with the people in the south. I don't see any reason not to just go ahead and kill people. Let's do it. Kill people. And we've also met a new faction. We have the League of Potterers. These are tinkers of a sort. And you can do a few things like them, like buy reclaimed vessels, but also if you have a leftover fleet that you don't want anymore, rather than just disband it, you can actually have them scrap it and give you some of the alloys back. Do I plan on doing that anytime soon? No, but once these cruisers are no longer useful, I mean, it's an option. Ooh, here's something new. The Orbital Ring. This is, oh, and also battleships. Ooh, but I need those two. Okay, but the Orbital Ring is a new type of megastructure you can build pretty much around any of your planets, giving you some extra space to work with and allowing you to also have defensive platforms and specialize the planet with various different upgrades. I want this, but I need battleships so I can forcefully subjugate everyone to the will of the hive. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, so if you have a vassal, and that vassal becomes disloyal, you know something they can do? They can go to another nation and say, hey, we would like to pledge allegiance to you, and if maybe, just maybe, you be willing to fight our current overlord, we'll join your side. I wasn't really expecting these guys to ask to join me, but okay. There we go. Finally, these guys simply give up. So the Pliff Plaff Galactic Empire is now mine. Excellent. Okay. So, we've got ourselves our first big honkin' vassal. Unfortunately, we couldn't grab these guys at the same time. That would have been very convenient, but oh well. Looks like we also picked up the Thorkel Tranquil Foundation as well, whoever you are. Hi. And also we got these guys. So we technically got 3 vassals out of that arrangement. All right, let's go to our contacts then. So if you want to figure out what to do with your vassals, best thing to do, go to agreements over here, and we can actually see each individual vassal I've got and what kinds of agreements I might have set up with them. Let's take a look at, let's say, the Pliff Plaff Galactic Empire, and take a look at the terms that we've got set up. Now, this might look a little familiar to federations, and that's because it does use a pretty similar system, but instead of the cohesion of a federation to worry about, you have a special thing called loyalty. And this resource, if you can build it up, will ensure that you can do fun things with your empire. A loyal empire is likely to be exploited in other cool ways, but if they become disloyal, they might pledge secret fealty like you already saw. Now, because I went to my policies and I set the subjugation war terms to a balanced setup, we're going to be going into the positive with our loyalty right off the bat. If we went for oppressive, you'd see that pretty much every nasty thing we could do to them would actually be here. For example, integration permitted, monthly loyalty change -4, right? Limit their diplomacy, etc. Do all of these, and basically you pick up a new vassal and they hate you right off the bat. I've avoided this. Now, you can change these terms, right? So, for example, let's say I wanted to allow for a holding or 2 to be constructed on my vassal's territory. We could do that. However, in order to propose any changes, let's say we want these guys to join in on all of my conflicts, note that it costs a lot of influence to do this, and you'll only be able to change this once every 5 years or so. So it's kind of important you start off close to where you want your final terms to be via the subjugation war terms policy. Otherwise, every time you pick up a new vassal, you might find yourself spending like 1,000 influence trying to get them back to something more reasonable. So there is that. Cool. Okay. Now, notice with our vassals, they are all currently set to this protectorate status. What this means is that they are absolutely pathetic technologically compared to me. So they are automatically going to be a protectorate style of vassal. What this does is it gets me extra influence and them 80% tech research cost, and this will last until they get to, I think it's about half of your tech level. So they're going to catch up really quick. Once we can pull that one off, then we can actually change them to a different specialization of vassal. I will worry about that later, but yeah, if you only have Protector as an option, don't worry, it just means that they're pitiful. Let them catch up to you with this incredible 80% tech research cost, and eventually they'll catch up and you can start specializing them into something cool and give yourself different Overlord bonuses. Actually, another thing we should take a look at here are holdings. Now, this is something that has to be negotiated in your terms. These guys are actually losing a lot of loyalty right now. I'm not too sure why we're losing so much. Divided patronage, yes, and also recently subjugated. These people don't like it, and they don't like me. We should probably improve relations. But anyway, something you can do on some of your statuses, if it is a term that you have already negotiated, would be to construct some holdings. If we go to agreements and click on this, we can see what those holdings might look like. And there's a bunch of different buildings we can work with. For example, if we did an aid agency, not only would we gain a little bit of loyalty back, but also we would get 13 more unity. All right, we could also exploit these guys, make them lose a bunch of energy, but I gain even more energy, right? Or there's extractions, production, Ministry of Truth, and we can do propaganda, an Offspring nest, and make these guys just generally better, right? Lots of cool things that you can do with holdings. There's a bunch of different buildings, some of which are locked behind certain types of governments, or in our case, progenitor hives. Jumping forward several more years in the game, I want to show you a couple more things. So first off, make note that you see all these thickened lines right along over here? For my empire, this represents places I have been placing down hyperlanes. And I gotta say, these things are freaking awesome. I'm loving them. All you gotta do is simply start moving your fleets around. They'll get up here to the hyper relay, right? And watch how fast these guys are gonna transport across the different star systems. Boom. Boom. And they're just gonna keep going from here. Boom. Yeah, way faster than anything I would have been able to do before. We also have something new in this expansion called a situation. Now, a situation is usually going to be something based off of maybe an event or maybe some sort of anomaly, but also if you find yourself in a situation where you've run out of some sort of a resource, right, and you're running a deficit. Now, I did just have a mineral shortage. I was at 0 with a negative number here, hence why I had a mineral shortage, but it looks like I've already kind of rebalanced and solved it. Nonetheless, I want to show you how this works, though. Once you have a deficit going, you start getting some nasty impacts. For example, less brain drone output, foundry output, and so on. And it gets worse if you leave this untended until it gets to such a point that you have a default and a whole load of nasty things can happen. And this can be the case for energy, a lack of food, a lack of alloys or consumer goods or whatever. Anything that's going into a deficit can cause some pretty huge issues. So keep an eye on this. This is something new. Now, another thing I want to talk about, vassals and their protectorate status. You remember how I said that vassals who are really inferior compared to you technologically are going to automatically be a protectorate status? Yeah, here's the thing. It turns out I am simply too good at this game. My science is so good compared to them that even with the 80% buff, they can't really keep up. Here's where I have a couple options. I could give them a load of my own research, subsidizing their monthly research by, let's say, up to 75%, and hope that that plus the 80% is enough to get them to catch up, and it probably would be. Alternatively, though, if I don't want to wait for this and I want to get some benefits from some specialized vassals, another option then would be to create some sectors and release new vassals. As an example, I just used my army to forcefully subjugate a whole bunch of primitives down over here, all of which should now be in the form of assimilating into our empire and our hive mind. And I will allow them to do that while I quickly build up a offspring nest. But then what I want to do after that's done, in fact, I guess I can go ahead and do it right now, I want to set these guys to a new sector. And from there, we would go to our sector map mode, and we could create a vassal from a different sector. This is something hives didn't used to be able to do, but this progenitor hive has the power. So you would simply click the button, choose a species, randomize the name, and boom. I've already done that with this sector up over here. Now, the reason you do this is released vassals start with all of your tech. So you don't have to worry about them playing some sort of a catch-up game. What we can do now then is go to agreements with these guys. They are automatically a vassal because they're at an equivalent tech level. And we would be able to change their specialization. The three new ones being Bulwark, Scalarium, and Prospectorium. Each of these guys would have some different benefits for our vassal and for us as the Overlord. So in this case, for example, I'm looking at this little empire right here, and they're situated right next to a big, nasty, scary fallen empire, it might make sense to make them into a defensive bulwark nation. By doing so, you can see that this creates a new specialization which they will gradually level up to different tiers as they gain experience and loyalty in this specialization. And that comes with different perks. So at Tier 1, for example, they get massive defense platform damage, lots of extra star-based damage, and so on. Lots of cool stuff that happens here. But we will have to pay them extra energy credits, minerals, and food. And you can see that down here in the contribution. It's kind of like a tax. I'm subsidizing their resources in order to make them an effective bulwark. There are other advantages too, though. So for example, they would gain certain important techs that make sense for being a bulwark, like FTL inhibition. But we also get some benefits, for example, cheaper starbase upgrades, and we build them faster. That's pretty cool. And if we are connected to their capital, then we would get a crime reduction and extra free planetary defense armies. And if we have to fight within their territory, right, in a purely defensive fight, 100% shield hit points in any of their friendly-owned systems. So this is pretty good just at Tier 1, and of course this only gets stronger as you go, including eventually the ability to hire admirals with the Bulwark trait. We can trade them over to us, and that trait I don't actually have handy right now, but it does make your admirals a little bit better. You'll get something similar here with the Scalarium for scientists or the Prospectorium for governors, so you can just have some better leaders by having at least one of each of these different types of specializations. These can be pretty darn powerful. I really do like this system. I think we'll make them a bulwark. However, we do have to wait for the 5 years cooldown to go away, and it does cost me a little bit of influence. And it does take some time, a fair bit of time, in fact, for these guys to level up. But that's why I want to get this process rolling now. And rather than wait for these guys to catch up, I'm just going to go ahead and release a few vassals in a few strategic locations and let them get a little bit more powerful. Oh, we also haven't talked too much more about orbital rings. Let's take a look at this down over here while I wait for those vassals to finish their cooldown. So these orbital rings, first off, look really awesome, but they basically function like a starbase, and they start off with only 2 modules available with which you can increase the number of districts in the planet below or get a shipyard, anchorages, pretty much anything you would do with the starbase plus some spacing. That's kind of nice, but the buildings down here are what's really critical, because you can use these to greatly improve your specialized planets. In this case, I could use some more minerals, for example, and this is a mineral-specialized planet. So I might build a low-gravity mega refiner, which increases the minerals per drone of 2. That's going to translate into a lot. You can do something similar with energy, with food, amenities, alloy processing, and so on. Lots of good stuff to be had over here. There's honestly not a lot really preventing you from building rings around every single one of your planets if you really want to invest in them. Oh boy, I don't know what just happened here. Oh, these guys. Yeah, there's kind of been a devouring swarm going on a rampage that is in fact Crisis Aspirant while I've been dealing with the L-Gate cluster. Yeah, I've been kind of letting this go for a little bit. Probably should get involved. I mean, I have to now. The entire galactic community is doing its thing. Whatever, that's going to be a very, very long and intrusive war. I'm not going to worry about that too much for this video. I do instead want to show that if you look under agreements here, these guys have been growing in power bit by little bit. So in 9 months, they would get up to level 2 for this specialization, which does mean that I have to supplement more of their income, but we would get some of these extra bonuses within their own territory, all of which is obviously quite helpful. So everything seems to be working as intended here. We actually definitely have 3 good vassals kind of ready to go. And in the meantime, yeah, if you want to take these guys and bring them up, hey, good for you. But I recommend giving them an absolute ton of science. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like if you play the game super well and you go for a tech rush, these guys don't seem able to do a whole lot. So this alone, for example, would help. All right, well, I think that's just about everything I can show you right now. The only thing I'm really missing right now will be the quantum catapult, which is really fun to yeet your fleet across the entire galaxy. However, it's going to take me a while to be able to build out a large megastructure, and I don't have an immediate use for it. But it can be pretty darn cool. That's something you'll have to discover on your own, though. Thank you all very much for watching this video, and again, thank you to Paradox Interactive for sponsoring today's video. You guys can find out more about the Overlord expansion in the link in the description down below. Be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, hit that notify bell, and I will see you guys next time.